Hey everyone. So, yep, you're getting a lecture. I don't want to fall off track. It will stress you out. It'll stress me out. If we get behind schedule, we'll have to crunch at the end, and we're already always crunched at the end. So, you will have a quiz. I feel a sneeze. You will have a quiz on this the next time I see you, and I'm going to try to make this as normal as possible, even though I'm literally sitting in my office covered in a blanket, nice and cozy. You'll probably hear my kids. It is what it is. All right, I'm actually going to go to screen share mode. So this is going to be set up just like a normal lecture, and you'll see the PowerPoint just like you normally would. So I'll go ahead and switch there for you, and we'll get started. So here we're talking about the autonomic nervous system, which, if you remember, can be broken into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. So those two kind of work together to maintain homeostasis throughout our body as a whole. The difference between the autonomic nervous system and the somatic nervous system, which is what we were already covering, is that here we're talking about things that happen automatically, things that happen without you being consciously aware of it, things that happen without you recognizing what's even going on. Your body's just naturally doing it. So this is all without conscious control. There are reflexes in our autonomic nervous system, much like we talked about in our somatic nervous system. So these are going to follow a similar reflex pattern where you have some type of sensory receptor going up to the spinal cord, synapsing with an interneuron, and now you have an autonomic motor neuron that's going to carry out the response. So the difference is just in that motor neuron. It's something that's automatically happening. And in some cases, the autonomic reflexes don't even go to the spinal cord. Sometimes they happen outside of the central nervous system altogether, and then they're relayed to the spinal cord. So it's an even quicker, more immediate response that's possible, because again, these are all things that are happening below our consciousness. So our autonomic nervous system is organized into something called ganglia. I try to highlight that word there. These ganglia remember, ganglia is a group of cell bodies outside of the central nervous system. So the autonomic ganglia are groups of cell bodies that are associated with autonomic motor neurons, okay? So they're going to send these signals to other neurons to communicate whatever the signal is, right? Whatever the response is. And so we'll get into some examples. Here's how these reflexes work, right? So you have your sensory signal coming in. I'm hoping you can see my mouse. I forget. It's been a while since I've made one of these recorded lectures. Nope, doesn't work like that. So you have your sensory information coming in, as always, afferent neuron, right? So this could be something like your stomach is empty, your stomach is full, right? Whatever. Some type of autonomic sensory type information goes up to your brain, synapses. Again, not always does it go up to your brain. Sometimes it just happens outside, especially in our digestive system. We'll look at that in a little bit. And then when it comes out, notice here, our motor commands are actually two chain links. There's actually two motor neurons, two autonomic motor neurons that are going to respond. When we were looking at our somatic nervous system, there was an upper motor neuron and a lower motor neuron. In the autonomic nervous system, you have all of the neurons that are within your central nervous system, and then leaving your central nervous system, there's two. There's always chains of two motor neurons in our autonomic nervous system. So that's one way somatic and autonomic are different. Not only do we have this difference between conscious level of control and unconscious level of control, but there's also the difference between single lower motor neurons controlling our peripheral effectors like our skeletal muscles. And then we have these links of two autonomic motor neurons. So more on this. Somatic motor division, this is our skeletal muscle. Autonomic, these are glands, these are smooth muscle cells, cardiac muscle cells. This is all of the involuntary stuff. So a continuation of that. As we said, there are two motor neurons in a chain of autonomic control. So we have something called ganglia, and this is where I'm going to switch back to my face. Stop share. There we go. It's been a while since I've done that. So here's the quintessential gingerbread. It's a little smaller, but that's okay. Same concept. Here we have, I'm going to grab some different colors. We have links of 2 motor neurons. So in half of our somatic nervous system, you have what we call really short preganglionic neurons and very long, pick a different color, very long postganglionic neurons. Ooh, oh, it's very light. Oh well. The blue is called a preganglionic neuron. So what you'll see, again, are ganglia that are around our body. So I'll draw a ganglia here. And that pink line is our postganglionic neuron. Notice where I went. I'm in the abdominal cavity. Why? Because that's where our autonomic nervous system is, right? Our autonomic nervous system is in our thoracic and abdominal cavity. I didn't go out to the arm. I didn't go down to the leg. The other type of fibers that we have, so remember I said we have short preganglionic and a long postganglionic. You can also have the opposite. You can have long preganglionic and short postganglionic. And let's draw our ganglia in there. And now the black doesn't want to work. We'll just make it blue. Okay. So same basic setup. Preganglionic neuron, postganglionic neuron, ganglia. The difference is between the lengths of these preganglionic fibers. Now, these are big words, but think about what it means. It's the nerve before the ganglia or the nerve after the ganglia. The ganglia is the cluster of cell bodies. So here you have a short preganglionic fiber and a long preganglionic fiber, or a long postganglionic fiber and a short one. Notice it's never short, short, or long, long, right? It's one's long and one's short. And that has to do with the functionality, okay? We'll get back to that in a second. So just kind of set that aside while I find the cap to this marker real quick. Ooh. There we go. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. Share. Here we go. Boom. Comparing somatic, right? Single motor neuron to skeletal muscle. In our autonomic, notice we have 2. This first one that's coming from the spinal cord would be called a preganglionic neuron. Here would be our ganglia, right? There would be other cell bodies nestled here. This is our postganglionic neuron, and notice where it's going. Smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or a gland. So our autonomic nervous system can be divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic. As we said, sympathetic is our fight or flight. Parasympathetic is our rest and digest. This is why we drew them differently, because our sympathetic and parasympathetic are structurally different as well. Our sympathetic nervous system is the one where our preganglionic fibers are short and our postganglionic fibers are long. So if we look here, am I drawing? I know I'm just a little like square in the corner, but that side where we drew a short preganglionic neuron and a long postganglionic neuron, that is our sympathetic nervous system. The side where we drew a long preganglionic and a short postganglionic is our, and I hope it doesn't show up as a mirror image, that would really suck, parasympathetic. I'm just writing parasymp. So I'll switch for a second and explain. Boop. There we go. So again, I hope this is not, I see a mirror image, but I hope when you're watching the video, you don't see a mirror image. So we have a preganglionic fiber that's short, a postganglionic fiber that's long. So in other words, these ganglia for our sympathetic nervous system are right outside of our spinal cord. They literally come off our spinal cord and synapse. Boom, right there. Remember those Rami communicans on our spinal cord? The gray and the white Rami communicans? That's where they come off. They come off of the spinal cord at the Rami communicans. We'll take a look at that structure in a minute. And then our parasympathetic This is actually going to come off of our cranial nerves. Some of our cranial nerves, like the vagus nerve, the glossopharyngeal nerve, the hypoglossal nerve, that's where our parasympathetic's coming from. In fact, I want to say it's like 70% of your parasympathetic output is just the vagus nerve itself. So kind of cool. We'll get there. Getting ahead of myself. So this is showing you the difference. Again, if my drawings confuse you, I know sometimes not everyone likes them. Sympathetic, short preganglionic fiber, long postganglionic fiber, and then you have the opposite for parasympathetic. So sometimes our sympathetic division is called the thoracolumnar division because literally these neurons are coming off of the thoracic cavity. That's where they're coming from. They're coming off of the spinal cord segments of our thoracic cavity and our lumbar cavity, right? So those basic kind of top and bottom parts, right? Not up by the neck, not up by the head, not in the middle, not the abdomen. I have to pause the recording for a second. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Okay. I hope that paused because it was just a random number that called me. Anyways, okay. Sympathetic, fight or flight. So think about what this means in terms of your body and how it acts. Fight or flight is increased respiration, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure. This is when your pupils get big and you get nervous. This is right before a test. This is maybe sometimes walking into the classroom, right? Knowing that you're going to see me and I make you nervous for whatever reason, right? I'm a hard teacher. This is a hard subject or whatever. This is walking down a dark alley. That's sympathetic. It's going to bring about emotion. This is stress. This is tension. This is not always something that you want to move towards. Usually this is something that you want to recoil or run away from. This also is produced when your body is physically exerting itself, when you're working hard, when you're running, when you're, participating in a sport. That's all sympathetic. Parasympathetic we call rest and digest. We also call this the craniosacral division because this is involving our cranial nerves and our sacral nerves. So the sacral nerves are going to innervate our reproductive organs and our urinary system, and then the cranial nerves innervate the thoracic and abdominal areas that are involved in autonomic responses. So our parasympathetic has sacral nerves, and those sacral nerves go in and innervate the reproductive organs. And we call this rest and digest because this is the exact opposite of fight or flight, right? This is calming down, slowing down. This is you ate too much at dinner and now you need to take a nap, okay? That's what the parasympathetic nervous system is. Take a look at this diagram. So this is kind of a replica, a much better replica, of the drawing that we did at the beginning, right? You have your brain, your spinal cord. Notice the green segments. The green segments coming off of the brain and the spinal cord are representing that craniosacral division, the parasympathetic nervous system, with their long preganglionic neurons, short postganglionic neurons, and then this orangey yellow area, this thoracolumnar division, coming off of the thoracic and the lumbar segments of our spinal cord, very short preganglionic fibers, longer postganglionic fibers. Different structure, different function, right? As always. So most of our organs have innervation from both sympathetic and parasympathetic. They're getting feedback to speed up and slow down at the same time. And that helps them maintain homeostasis. It helps them maintain a resting level of muscle tone, and it helps them kind of be ready to spring into action if they need to. So there's always a balance between these two systems in all of our organs. So the difference between pre and postganglionic neurons, right? This is the same concept as presynaptic and postsynaptic cells. So a lot of students get hung up on the big terms here. All preganglionic fiber means is it's one that's coming off of the central nervous system, going to the ganglia, and then postganglionic means that it's going from the ganglia to the target organ. All right? So let's go into the next system here. Let's talk about the anatomy of our sympathetic nervous system. So remember that our sympathetic nervous system is called the thoracolumnar division. This is based on the thoracic and lumbar segments of our body, right? And so there are three places where the ganglia for our sympathetic nervous system is located. One is called sympathetic chain ganglia. These sympathetic chain ganglia are literally like a chain link on both sides of our spinal cord. So I'm going to switch from screen share back to me. Hi. I don't have an eraser, so I'm just going to use my blanket to erase my board here. And I want to show you what I mean. So let's go back. We're going to do an anterior view so that you understand what this is going to look like. Anterior view. Here's the brain and the spinal cord, right? What I'm talking about when I'm talking, I know the brain looks a little off center. It's a front view. So this chain ganglia is literally coming off, I keep forgetting this red sucks, coming off of the sides of our spinal cord, and it kind of forms this like a chain link fence down the sides. Now again, I only drew 4, right? But there's about 12 in there, right? And so it would be a lot bigger than that, but that's where they are. So that little red line that I drew is the preganglionic fiber. The ganglia is where the synapse occurs. So that preganglionic fiber comes off of our central nervous system, off of our spinal cord, goes out to the ganglia, and then it's going to synapse again, right? It's going to synapse again with a neuron that we call the postganglionic neuron, which is longer, right? And that's going to go to target organs. Maybe it is our heart. Maybe it is our liver, right? Maybe it is our intestines, right? I just drew random things, but hopefully you get the picture. So that's sympathetic chain ganglia. Back to screen share. So there's that. The preganglionic neurons of our sympathetic nervous system, running out of places to put things, sorry about that, are coming off of the lateral horns, right? So remember the lateral gray horns and the lateral white columns of our spinal cord, that's where all of our autonomic nervous system stuff is, right? In that thoracic and lumbar area of our spinal cord. So preganglionic axons go out the white rami communicans. Remember the white rami communicans? If you think about the spinal cord model in lab, you have your dorsal root and your ventral root coming off. They fuse for the spinal nerve. On the back, you have the dorsal rami, and then coming off towards the front, there's those 2 little sticks. You have the gray rami communicans, which is medial, and the white rami communicans, which is lateral. Those preganglionic axons go out through the white rami communicans, which is the lateral little stick coming off of the model in lab. If you don't know what I'm talking about, here it is. In lab, we don't have this structure there. We don't have the chain ganglia showing. We only have the gray and white rami communicans. But here's what you see. You see 2 little sticks coming off, and that's where they go. They go to this chain ganglia, which is part of the sympathetic nervous system. So we also have collateral ganglia. So back to our little picture here, and I don't even have to zoom in to show it to you because this one's pretty straightforward. The collateral ganglia are literally in front of our spinal cord. They're right in front. So they're kind of at the wall, the back wall of our abdominal cavity. And so they're very, very close to all of the abdominal organs, and they form something called splanchnic nerves. The splanchnic nerves are a huge branch of abdominal nerves carrying sympathetic information, carrying that fight or flight type information. So here you see we have our thoracolumnar division, right, our sympathetic nervous system coming off in chains on the side or in front with our collateral ganglia. So overall, there's 3 major synapse connections, as we said. The sympathetic chain ganglia is one. We have the collateral ganglia as another. And there's also this kind of ascending or descending happening at the spinal cord level. This is kind of right next to the spinal cord where they branch off. that gray rami communicans is for postganglionic axons to reunite with the spinal nerve. So this is where those ganglion, or where those neurons kind of come back into the central nervous system to go back to their target cells. So they kind of backtrack, and you can see this in this pattern here. So if we take a look at the overall anatomy, we have some type of motor command coming out. Notice it's coming off of the lateral gray horn. I'm looking at this central spinal cord cross section. Lateral gray horn. This is our preganglionic fiber here. Goes out the white rami communicans. It's going to synapse. See that little synapse there? And then what happens is those branches come off of that, new neurons come off of that ganglia, and they're going to go to different areas. They're going to go to the target cells, right, out the ventral root. So the synapse is there. That nerve transmission goes back through the gray rami communicans and out the ventral root to where it needs to go. The only thing that's going up and down this the spinal cord segment, the chain ganglia, is communication between the ganglia themselves, right? It's just collateral ganglia going up and down, sharing the information, letting them know, hey, I just sent this signal. Oh, you're sending that signal? Cool. I'll send that same signal, right? So it's just about communication and support, as well as a backup plan, right? If there's some type of injury involved, you want to have some type of way of negating that injury. So ultimately, neurotransmitters are the star of the show when it comes to our autonomic nervous system. These always bind to specific receptors. We've talked about a few types of neurotransmitters. We mostly talked about acetylcholine before. We've mentioned epinephrine and norepinephrine, but we haven't really got into them yet. Well, this is where they're going to really become super important to understand. So neurotransmitters will be released, and they bind to specific receptors on the postsynaptic cell. And the postsynaptic cell can have different types of receptors. And so that postsynaptic cell can respond differently depending on which neurotransmitter is released. So that is key here in our autonomic nervous system. We have acetylcholine, and we have epinephrine and norepinephrine are the major neurotransmitters that we're interested in. Acetylcholine is always an excitatory neurotransmitter when we're talking about the autonomic nervous system. So it's always going to cause an excitatory postsynaptic potential in our postganglionic cell. So it's the neurotransmitter that's specifically between the preganglionic and postganglionic cells. So at that ganglia, sympathetic ganglia, collateral ganglia, we have acetylcholine being released as our neurotransmitter. It's different, though, between the postsynaptic cell and the target cell, right? So the target cell is the liver, the smooth muscle, the whatever, right? That's the end point of this information. The neurotransmitter that's released from the postsynaptic cell to that target cell could be acetylcholine, it could be epinephrine, or it could be norepinephrine. And so that's going to basically determine, is it going to be activated or deactivated or excited or inhibited, right? Which neurotransmitter is released. So not only do we have different neurons, so this is kind of like it's growing in complexity. If you're following along already, it's going to get a little bit more complicated for just a minute, and then hopefully it all comes back together. So the idea that we have these different divisions, parasympathetic and sympathetic, they have different structures with their pre- and postganglionic cells, right, in terms of size and arrangement. We have different neurotransmitters, but our postsynaptic cells also have different receptors. So we have alpha-1 receptors. These are receptors that are going to bind to epinephrine, and they're going to cause smooth muscle contraction. So alpha-1 receptors are located in lots of different organs, specifically ones that have smooth muscle, because we're talking about the autonomic nervous system. Alpha-2, these are in preganglionic cells. So again, this is all going to basically dictate how that signal gets sent. Alpha-1 receptors are excitatory. Alpha-2 receptors can be inhibitory. They can actually turn off or relax the smooth muscle, kind of inhibit their contractions. So we also have adrenergic receptors, which are going to respond to the epinephrine and the norepinephrine. These are beta 1, beta 2, and beta 3 receptors. So beta 3 receptors are in cardiac muscle cells. Beta 2 receptors are in smooth muscle cells, like in our bronchioles, like in our respiratory tract. And beta 3 receptors are in adipose and like digestive tract locations. So let's back up just a minute and talk about sympathetic receptors. We'll do a little graphic organizer. Now I don't have that much room, so sympathetic receptors. I really hope this is not mirror image. So our sympathetic receptors are, we have alpha 1. Alpha 1, this is blood vessels, skin. We have alpha 2. Again, I'm just abbreviating here. Alpha 2, this is preganglionic. I know this is horrible, I'm sorry. Preganglionic. So these are our targets, right? This is just the preganglionic cells. This is coming out of the central nervous system where those receptors will be, right? So this is kind of the start of the chain, the start of the command. And then our beta receptors, we have beta 1. Beta 1 receptors are cardiac. They're on cardiac muscle. Beta 2 receptors, these are in the respiratory tract. And beta 3 receptors are in adipose and GI tract. Totally ran out of room. Sorry about that. So what we have, sorry, my computer's freaking out for a second. Do this. Okay, okay. So hopefully you followed that. That's just for basic organization of where these different receptors are. So remember, neurotransmitters are just kind of released into the interstitial fluid, right? They're just kind of released there. And so which cells are going to respond is going to basically be dictated by which receptors those cells have. So these are all adrenergic, which means they're all going to respond to epinephrine and norepinephrine. So if acetylcholine is present, these types of tissues won't respond. They're not going to be stimulated. So let's go back to sharing. Ooh, oh, there it is. Okay. So we also have cholinergic receptors. So those were all adrenergic receptors that I showed you. Those are all going to respond to epinephrine or norepinephrine. The cholinergic receptors respond to acetylcholine. So we have muscarinic receptors in sweat glands, and we have nicotinic receptors in all of our postganglionic neurons. So all of our postganglionic neurons respond to acetylcholine. So preganglionic neurons all have alpha 1. Postganglionic neurons all have nicotinic, and then the target cells can have alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3. Does that make sense? That's the pattern of receptors. The pattern of receptors is important in understanding how the signal is transmitted. So let's talk about these in a little bit more detail. Alpha 2 receptors. These are different from other adrenergic receptors because in alpha 2, remember, we're talking about preganglionic neurons. These are basically stemming from the central nervous system going to the preganglionic neuron. This is the gatekeeper to all of the autonomic transmission that has to take place. When norepinephrine binds to the alpha 2, those axon terminals basically cancel. They block, right? So they block the transmission. They're going to stop it. So in other words, it creates this kind of feedback loop where you have this transmission going, it's going, and then as soon as the alpha 2 receptors are activated, it stops the transmission, right? So this is an example of negative feedback loops. So I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe you're hungry and your stomach's growling. I'm just kind of making this up so you can understand. But you're hungry and your stomach's growling, and so you start eating, right? And eating then triggers the stretch in your stomach, and then your stomach says, I'm not hungry anymore, I'm not empty. And then that kind of stop signal can be sent, right? And then you can recognize, okay, I don't need to eat anymore, I'm not hungry, right? So it's an autonomic thing that happens, but sometimes there's an actual conscious level of control. That's just an example that I chose with the conscious level of control, but it's not always conscious level. Here's showing you the different types of receptors. Alpha 2, notice we're on the preganglionic cell here. When norepinephrine is bound to the alpha 2 receptors, look what happens. Nothing, right? So when our alpha 2 receptors are empty, when norepinephrine is not bound to them, they're releasing, they're sending their signal, they're doing their thing, you feel hungry or whatever the thing is, right? So on cardiac muscle, let's talk about cardiac muscle for a second. So ultimately, our sympathetic nervous system has widespread effects on our body, right? This is everything from blood pressure to hunger, you guys. This covers so much in our autonomic nervous system. There's like literally entire master's degrees dedicated to understanding how the autonomic nervous system works. But specifically on cardiac muscle cells, let's talk about our cardiac muscle cells. If you remember, have beta-1 receptors from our little chart. They have beta-1 receptors. Beta-1 receptors bind to epinephrine, right? And that's going to cause an increase in contraction, right? The ion channels, when it's bound, the ion channels open, it's going to increase the rate of contraction, increase the force of contraction, get your heart going. Let's think about it. This is kind of like, duh, what is epinephrine? Epinephrine is adrenaline. When adrenaline is released, how does your body feel? Of course your body feels excited. Your heart's pounding. Your heart's racing, right? This is sympathetic response. How does your heart respond under sympathetic innervation? Your heart gets excited. It beats stronger and faster. And that's because of these beta-1 receptors. That's what they do. They're going to cause excitation in the heart. So on smooth muscle, our alpha-1 receptors on smooth muscle, kind of the same idea. Norepinephrine is going to allow the constriction of those vessels, kind of get them to block off the flow, because the whole idea when you're undergoing this fight or flight response is your digestive system, your urinary system, your integumentary system, all of those secretions, they don't need to happen. They're not as important as the other things. But what is important is bringing oxygen in and mobilizing metabolic reserves and increasing your heart rate and increasing your respiration rate. So kind of the opposite is going to happen when you're under sympathetic control. All of the smooth muscle and all of that digestive stuff, that's all going to relax under alpha-1 receptors. Alpha-1 receptors get bound to norepinephrine and they just kind of shut down the system over there. Meanwhile, beta-2 receptors come and they're going to actually cause dilation in the bronchioles. They're going to cause them to widen and allow more air in. So again, the type of receptor is going to determine the response. Do you know what sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. The inhalers. Anyone asthmatic? Right? The inhalers, they have an activator, and then that activates your beta-2 receptors. So guess what? When you take your inhaler, literally what that's doing is it's relaxing the smooth muscle in your bronchioles. It's dilating them, allowing you to bring more air in. So this is just continuation of the same thing, right? Dilating the blood vessels with those beta-2, and then all of your digestive features, things like that, are basically turned off. Right? So this is just summarizing the overall effect of sympathetic nervous system. Overall, relaxation of the smooth muscle in our digestive system. Digestion slows, right? We're not worried about digesting the food we ate if we're in a fight or flight scenario, right? Our pupils actually get bigger, let in more light so we can see and check out what's going around. And our blood vessels to most of our exocrine glands get constricted also. In other words, you know, we're not going to secrete oil and milk and tears and things like that when we're under a fight or flight. Sweat glands, we do. Sweat glands are not affected by sympathetic or parasympathetic. Sweat glands are just there. So as you're breathing more and moving more, your sweat glands will be activated no matter what. Even though we sometimes feel like they're activated. On cellular metabolism, sympathetic innervation speeds it up. Beta-3 receptors on our adipocytes are going to be triggered, and that's going to trigger lipid metabolism, breaking down those fats. You're stressed out, you need more sugar in your blood. We got to mobilize these fatty acids, make sure that all of your body cells have enough energy so that they can make enough ATP and do what they got to do to run away from this super dangerous situation, right? Whatever the fight or flight situation is. Beta-2 receptors that are in their liver, that's going to trigger glucose to be released from the glycogen stores that are in your liver. And beta-2 receptors in the pancreas are also going to trigger glucagon release. Glucagon release pushes more glucose into the blood. So overall, we have sweat glands being activated because of increased metabolism, increased movement, right? Increased respiration, increased heart rate. And all that's happening there is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine being released, and that's going to trigger our sweat gland activation. And that's part of a feedback loop also, right? That's that hypothalamus homeostatic center. I was like mixing up the word in my head. Your hypothalamus homeostatic center kind of balancing those things out. So summary chart is next, right? This is all of the things that are innervated by your sympathetic nervous system. Your eye, your salivary glands, your heart, right? All of these things have not only target tissues from our sympathetic, but they also have an overall response, right? So they have different receptors, so they'll respond differently based on the input, right? Our adrenal glands, our adrenal medulla, so our adrenal glands have, and we have a whole chapter dedicated to the endocrine system, but our adrenal glands are the little hats on top of the kidneys, and the inner core of the adrenal gland is called the adrenal medulla. And so the adrenal medulla is this area where our stress hormones are created. And so when sympathetic activation is going on, when we're under this fight or flight response, the postganglionic neurons that are part of this adrenal medulla setup will actually start releasing more of those stress hormones into the blood. So it's kind of another example of a feedback loop. Your body's saying, hey, we have this fight or flight situation going on. When your adrenal medulla gets activated, that's going to send shivers, fight or flight shivers down your whole body. So every cell in your body knows that you're in fight or flight mode. Your stomach's not going to be like, oh, whatever, bro, I'm just going to keep digesting over here. I don't care what you say. No, it's shut down because of the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla takes over. And that's when you get this kind of flood of fight or flight throughout the body. So the acetylcholine in this instance, I should say, is released directly into your blood. And so it has this system-wide effect, and it acts as a hormone. It's no longer considered a neurotransmitter. It's going to act like a hormone. The epinephrine that's released. So acetylcholine is released at the postsynaptic cell, right? That's going to trigger epinephrine to be released from the adrenal medulla itself. So it's going to float around the blood, triggering everything to get excited, get into that fight or flight. So this is that preganglionic neuron, right? Preganglionic neuron. And then the ganglionic neuron, right? Which it's the ganglionic neuron itself is inside our adrenal medulla. It's not pictured here for some reason. But it will trigger our adrenal medulla to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. That's what these little purple things are, which go into the blood, right? So acetylcholine gets released, goes into the blood. There we go. Other cells, it can also increase mental alertness because it increases blood flow, getting more oxygen to the brain, getting more glucose to the brain, things like that. It can actually increase skeletal muscle tone. You actually get a little tense, right? Which is why if you've been undergoing prolonged periods of stress, maybe by taking an AMP course, you might have upper back trouble, you might have some back pain, you might be feeling maybe tightness in your jaw, right, wherever you kind of carry tension in your body. You might feel that because of these stress hormones making you kind of tense. It could also increase your blood's clotting capabilities because, again, fight or flight, this is survival mode. So if you were, say, bleeding for whatever reason, your blood would clot much faster under sympathetic innervation. You could get goosebumps because that's contracting of the smooth muscle, the erector pili. So there's lots of different things that can come about because of sympathetic activation. So some pharmacology and some actual drug research uses this same concept of body chemistry to design drugs that will help you kind of do whatever it is that your body's not doing effectively. So it's kind of a cool field of research. So some drugs act as antagonists, where they're actually going to block the receptor, and some of them will work as agonists, where they bind to the receptor and they act like the neurotransmitter itself. And so there's common drugs that are on the market, things like alpha-1 blockers, which are antagonists. So if you remember alpha-1, this is all of our blood vessels, right, skin, things like that. So alpha-1 receptors are going to be blocked by alpha-1 blockers, right, hence alpha-1 blocker. So it's going to block the norepinephrine there, preventing your blood vessels from constricting. And if your blood vessels can't constrict, then they stay big. And if your blood vessels stay big, then your blood pressure stays low because of the inverse relationship between volume and pressure, right? Certain alpha-1 blockers can also cause relaxation of smooth muscles in the prostate for people that are having, men, that are having issues with an enlarged prostate, to help them urinate appropriately. So lots of uses of alpha-1 blockers. Alpha-2 agonists, these are going to bind to alpha-2 receptors. It's going to activate them. So if you remember alpha-2, this is all of our preganglionic cells. This is going to decrease the output of our sympathetic activation in general. So this would be maybe to calm your body down overall. So this would create a relaxed state in your body, maybe to recover from withdrawal, or maybe this is to relieve hypertension that's happening all over your body, right? Increased high blood pressure, lots of different mechanisms for that. And this will be the last slide. So there's also beta blockers. Beta blockers are antagonists, right? It's going to block the beta-1 receptor. Beta-1 receptors are located on the heart. Remember that those are the cardiac ones. So if we're blocking the beta-1 receptor, we're going to decrease, right? Because beta-1 kind of stimulates the heart. If we block beta-1, we're going to decrease and slow the heart down. So this is to help decrease the stress load on the heart, help keep the heart healthy by reducing the amount of tension and stress that the heart is under. There's also beta-2 agonists, which are going to help dilate and widen the respiratory tract, those bronchioles, during like an asthma attack. So I said I was going to stop there just because I don't want to squeeze too much into this lecture. We'll finish this lecture and we'll probably end up starting the next one the next time I see you guys. There will be a quiz on this as well. That's why I took the time to make it, because I don't want us to get off track and have to lecture in lab. That's always really bad. I'm going to stop sharing, and thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in class on Tuesday. Bye.